Well, hey, everybody. I'm Mike Uhas. I'm with the Wisconsin chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. We have a very special presentation tonight. Outside of our normal realm of uh, First Friday evening meetings, this one is online only. It's covering a special event, kind of the largest thing to happen in Wisconsin area railroading since the Canadian National bought the Wisconsin Central in 2001. So kind of a significant for Wisconsin kind of thing happening here. I want to tell you a couple things about the Wisconsin chapter. We have regular meetings, generally the first Friday of every month. And I'll tell you about the next ones we have on tap. And next one after this is Friday, the 1st of April. John Jebko, affectionately known as the Godfather, he's a photographer. He's been shooting Kodachromes since the 1940s. Really came into his own in the 1950s. He went on a trip in 1957, September of 1957, and he took all kinds of great Kodachromes on this trip, and so he's going to share some of those with Ray Peacock. John Jebko and Ray Peacock are going to be detailing the Godfather's 1957 travels, and that'll be on the 1st of April. On the 8th of April, our members will have another Gab Fest on the second Friday. And then what comes up next? Oh, the 19th of April, we have an online slideshow, and I think we might have one presenter slot still remaining. If you're interested, send me an email, please. That's president@nrhswis.org, if you would. And then on the 6th of May, we're going to have two shows from Andrew S. Nelson, a program on the Wisconsin Central and a program on the Green Bay and Western. So you're going to want to be here for all of these. Now, in the audience here tonight are a bunch of members of the Wisconsin chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. And I want to say thank you to all of the members, because it's members who make this meeting and all of our meetings possible. If you find yourself interested in our kind of presentation, we would certainly welcome you to join the Wisconsin chapter. Simply go to www.nrhswis.org and do the PayPal thing there, $21, or just send a check for $20 to the address on your screen. So it's going to be a great evening tonight. I'm going to just mention a couple of ground rules here. We're going to ask everybody to remain muted during the presentation, and that's for a couple of reasons. But first of all, more than likely, they're gonna answer your questions before they even come up. But in the event that they don't, our presenters will take all questions at the end. So kind of make a note of that. You could unmute yourself at the end during the question and answer period and pose your question to Stefan or Brian at that point, or you could use the little chat function, and we'll try to get to the chat as well. So we'll make this an interesting meeting. Now, I want to introduce our presenters, and then they're going to get right into it. Stefan, I've known for a bunch of years, back when he worked for LaSalle Bank, and he was just a lowly vice president at a bank. You know, like there's everybody at a bank has to be a vice president, right, Stefan? And,
yes,
indeed. That bank transitioned to Bank of America, and he made the switch, went to work for Watco Companies after being on the other side of the desk as the guy that was working out financial deals for railroads and stuff. At the time, one of his clients was, I guess it's okay for me to say this at this point, Wisconsin and Southern, right? You worked with those folks, so you became kind of familiar with that property. And then after a while, you'd been at Watco for a while, and you were on the team that integrated Wisconsin and Southern into the Watco family. So that's a feather in your cap, Stefan. Stefan's involved with a lot of different things. He just stepped down as the president of the Midwest Association of Rail Shippers. He is the chairman of the Short Line Safety Institute. He's on the executive committee and a founding member of the Indiana University Kelley School of Business Transportation Executive Board. That's a handful.
That is a long, we got to cut that down.
Yeah. A president of the John W. Barriger the Third National Railroad Library. And you are vice chairman right now at the American Short Line and Regional Railroad Association. So in addition to all the railroad stuff that you've done for railroads, you're with a bunch of associations too, and that's a wonderful thing. Our other presenter is Brian Buchanan, and he has a long railroading career as well. He spent one summer working on a track gang for the Grand Trunk Western way back in the day. But once he graduated college, he went to work for the Chicago Northwestern. He was there for about 6 years or so until the formation of the Wisconsin Central, at which point you started with the Wisconsin Central pretty much on day one and were there for the duration until takeover by Canadian National. And he maintained his employment with Canadian National right up until this past September. And interesting thing, Brian, among his many responsibilities at Canadian National, was the basically the point person of divesting the railroad of these branch lines in Wisconsin. One of the point persons, and now he left Canadian National, and now he's working on the team that took it over. So it's full circle again. So with that, I am going to turn this over to my friend Stefan Loeb, and he's going to tell you all about Foxy.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for the introduction. I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone at the Wisconsin chapter, the NRHS, all of those that signed in this evening to listen to us. It's very humbling to just see that many people signed in to hear this story, and hopefully we can at least meet your expectations and be entertaining, hopefully as well. It's interesting getting prepared for this. You look at the date, and it's kind of late March, and it's crazy to believe 12 months ago we were just finalizing the deal with CN, getting pretty close to the finish line. I believe we filed actually in the first couple of days of April with the STB and made the announcement. But just to think that it's a year later and we only have 2 months under our belt of operations, what happened? And that's the story here. As Mike said, I've spent close to 20 years on the M&A side of railroad transactions. And while every deal is different, and you'll see that in a second, this one was truly an epic experience, good, bad, ugly, otherwise. It taught us all a lot. But in the end, everything that I think we were trying to accomplish, thought we could accomplish, is going to be accomplished, is being accomplished for the good of the industry, the shippers, and most importantly, the communities there that the railroad serves. So I'm going to leave all of what Brian does to him. My agenda today, I'm going to do a very quick Watco introduction. I'm sure most of you know us. And then we're going to dive right into what CN called Project Omaha. And maybe one of the first questions, because I actually don't know the answer to this, is why they chose Project Omaha. Because internally at Watco, everyone was saying, oh, is this a UP deal? No, it is not a UP deal. It's a CN deal. We're going to talk about the process and our strategy. We're going to talk about the fact that, hey, we won, but then it was, if only we knew, it was only just the beginning, like I just talked about earlier. Just delving into the fact that people were really mad. There was an emotional aspect to this transaction that I don't think anyone had seen before, and we'll kind of delve into that and some of the interesting things there, and then just the waiting game. Due to all the extraordinary things happening in the Surface Transportation Board. And then I'll kind of stop at integration on day one. And then I'll flip it over to Brian for his perspective and his really good photos. Brian is one hell of a photographer. He's one of those guys that makes me just want to just run my camera over with my car and just give up. So we'll dive into it here. Before we do, though, I get a lot of questions about why the Foxy. And so I wanted to delve into this first because I don't think we'll ever call it by its real name. And the story behind this, I think, is just kind of interesting. And I'll share because it's actually something I struggle with every time we start a new railroad. And it's basically based on the fact that the owner of Railmarks, RailInc., which is owned by the American Association of Railroads, Association of American Railroads, never retires a mark. So all the marks over the years, even if they've been inactive, they will not retire a mark and give it to a new entity. So when we win a deal or are about to start up a railroad, we pick a name, we come up with a name, and then we have to go to RailInc. And see what the closest option is. And you wouldn't believe how terrible these options are. And you just try and pick, as it says here, the least sucky option. And it's why sometimes you look at our marks maybe and go, why'd they do that? It's just because it's very hard to find marks that aren't taken these days. So the actual name of the railroad is the Fox Valley and Lake Superior Rail System. We call it that because of the various branches that is made up of this line. It's not a continuous system, or a continuous line. So we said calling it a system probably makes sense. None of the logical options were there. As you can see, I threw some out. But they did send the Foxy over as an option. And we're all scratching our head. I'm calling HR. It's like, hey, is this like a cancel me thing? Cancel culture? Are we going to be okay on this? And we decided, you know what? This is a good name. And as long as the logo isn't too promiscuous, let's go with it. And so I think the funny thing now is, in 20 years, again, hearkening back to another famous railroad that ran through Wisconsin, I think we're not going to even know what the Foxy actually stands for, just like the Sioux line of years past. So I just wanted to go into that. And then obviously just to poke fun at Brian, I stole one of his photos too. That's I think the first night switching Green Bay packaging on the Quincy Street lead there in Green Bay. So real quick on Watco, single source transportation supply chain services company. What does that mean? Well, really what it means is we didn't start out with a network, or we weren't founded by Abraham Lincoln. We grow with our customers by valuing them, valuing our people, and safely improving every day, and then earning the right to do business with our customers and earning the right to have our team trust us tomorrow to continually grow. We are generally known for short lines, especially in this group. I do want to point out that is just one part of many different business units that we now have. And you can see how we kind of split it up here. We have almost 90 terminals. We have a third-party logistics business. We have a rail car repair network, and we have a design build engineering team to design not just projects for us, but for our customers. Because of all those businesses, we move and handle virtually every commodity you can think of. And the joke I've been telling this year is we actually helped a customer charter a bulk vessel of fireworks this year because of all the port congestion with containers. And so, when you start learning about fireworks, it's like, wow, we really do handle everything at this point. I included this slide. I think it's interesting for folks to see what we do. It's split into two of the last group of business units that I just talked about, the rail side on the left and the terminal ports on the right. You can see a lot of the business is what we call heat and eat. So things that aren't as cyclical, hopefully, a lot of agriculture, a lot of lumber forest products and minerals on the left, and then metals and other bulk commodities on the right, obviously for our port and terminal business. But pretty diversified considering how concentrated certain short lines and terminals can be, and we're very proud of that. This is our network. It's, as you can see, a lot of dots on the map. The yellow are the short lines. What's interesting about this is people go, well, how did you decide to do this? And the one thing that you'll take away from Watco is we don't wake up and say, we're going to go to Southern Idaho. Again, based on our foundation principles that I showed you earlier, we follow where our customers have needs, and we go into businesses where, again, they have needs and need help, and we try and supply that solution. And so as I tell our commercial team every day, we may be in a place we never have been tomorrow, and we may be doing something that we have never done until tomorrow. And it's just a really fun way to go deliver a solution to customers in a very competitive marketplace. I'll do a real quick Wisconsin commercial, even though obviously you know what mostly we do here. This is one of our brand new bridges, by the way, out on the line out to Prairie du Chien over the Wisconsin River. Obviously, you know us very well, as Mike said, from the Wisconsin and Southern, which we were very fortunate enough to acquire in 2012. The other dots on the map here, I'll get into in a second, though. You know, we do have a couple of we have a repair shop, a couple of transload facilities in addition to the rail network that we developed on the railroad. And interestingly, the Oshkosh transload, which is kind of on the north end of the WSOR system, was actually first developed to take business off the Foxy due to lack of performance by the CN with one of the customers there. But then it's diversified into plenty of other products, and we just see a big opportunity there to kind of be a spot on the map where customers not on a railhead can get to us and then into the Chicago gateway. We did the same thing in Madison. We opened a major salt terminal. It started as a salt terminal, has moved into some of the other commodities you see here. Really interesting to see all the major folks that are concerned about the environment and then see a huge pile of salt right in downtown Madison. But it's been a really nice way to increase the market for a big shipper from Michigan, and also again for WSDOT to get affordable salt into their network. Lastly, we have the Cudahy Repair and Maintenance Shop. It's located off the UP in just kind of South Milwaukee, I guess. And again, full service railcar repair shop. So again, we are not just the WSOR. Okay, so that's the Watco commercial, and now we'll transition to the Foxy deal. And this is a quote that actually hung at my desk for some time. Craig Ritchie, who is our Watco chief counsel and been around almost as long as Watco has, had this quote, and I just loved it, which there were times where we were just so confused. We would just say, I need clarity of thought around my confusion, which when you think about it, doesn't even make sense, which again, a lot of this deal didn't make sense. And so we just found ourselves saying it over and over again, sometimes to laugh, sometimes to cry, sometimes because we really were endlessly confused. And in the end, when we closed, I told Craig I took the quote off the board because we didn't have to be confused anymore. So it was something that we said early and often, and a nice way to kick off the transaction. So how did this all begin? Well, the Project Omaha book arrives from Canadian National in September of 2020. Along with a public announcement that it was selling, the approximate 670 miles of track, which you can see in red on the right, serving the upper Midwest, Northern Ontario, and most importantly, taking a commensurate asset write down on these assets to be able to sell them. And I'll get to why that happened in a second. The winner of this process would enter into a 75-year agreement with CN on some of the commercial agreements and other things, with several options to renew. So very long-term structure here, which is very important. A lot of short line transactions these days are much shorter than that. So it really showed CN's commitment to bringing in a partner with a long-term goal of growing the traffic and working with the shippers. So very, very crucial there, really got everyone's attention in the industry, quite honestly. As I mentioned, it would be governed by a handling carrier agreement whereby CN keeps the through rate pricing, but no interchange restrictions, which I'll get to in a second. Non-binding bids were due at the end of November, which is a pretty typical turnaround for deals of this nature. And as you can see, the sale was broken down into clusters where CN retained the two major main lines through northern Wisconsin, obviously the main line to Duluth, and then the secondary main line up to the Sioux, with the lines essentially branching off of those two routes. The clusters were a mix of heavily and lightly trafficked corridors, which basically, as I say here, they were almost short lines within a short line. You had to look at each one differently based on operating patterns and how much volume they had and density and just what the shipper's needs were. So even though it was one transaction, the way this actually ended up, all these clusters were almost their own model, if you will, the way we had to approach it. This was not the first time we had looked at a lot of these lines. We were very familiar with the vast majority of these lines. It actually goes back to 2012 when CN originally approached us and several others about purchasing what we were calling the blue lines. And what's funny is you will hear people at WSDOT, you will hear people at CN, you will hear Watco people, you will hear other short line people call these things the blue lines. And I always was like, why are these things called the blue lines? So apparently my predecessor at Watco, Ed McKechnie, had a map, and this is a 2014 version, but it, going back, the CN lines on the WSDOT state map were always blue. And when we started talking to Bill Gardner at Wisconsin and Southern, he was always mentioning the acquisition opportunities. And he was always pointing, these blue lines right here, guys, these blue lines, these are what we need to buy. And so we just started calling them the blue lines. And to this day, you will hear that discussed throughout railroading, and that's where it came from. The blue lines at the time in 2012, though, only included what I just showed as the northern cluster. So basically Wausau North, and that was it. But again, still very exciting. We CN hosted several bidders on high rail trips in September of 2012. Brian was actually on those high rail visits, I believe. Mm-hmm. We worked with WSDOT at Watco to put in a bid using a mix of private money from us and public WSDOT funding. The plan was to have the state own the track, very similarly to how they own the WSOR structure. And we thought we had a really good proposal based on the fact that these were very light density lines. It didn't include any of the major customers in Wausau. It was kind of all the stuff north. At the time, the line still ran all the way up to Ashland, although what many call the Highway 8 corridor was essentially out of service the way this map depicts it today. But the problem was, after we did this great job submitting the deal, final bids were never reviewed. CN was never willing to take the write down I mentioned earlier on its book value to sell the lines. And what we found out is one of the tenets of PSR, which is financial kabuki theater a lot of times. And what CN did, it was legal, but just to me as an ex-banker, just baffling, is they assigned the entire purchase price of the WC evenly over all miles. So even though we all know that the strategic intent of the purchase was to go Superior to Chicago, the CN allocated that line as the same purchase price per mile as the White Pine sub, for example, and depreciated all of them normally, meaning that the White Pine sub on the CN books were incredibly marked up. And so basically, the problem you had is that nothing was going to happen. CN tried this many times since 2012 with us, with other competitors, with WisDOT. But until CN was willing to take the write-off, the bath, if you will, this was never going to happen. And in Stefan's just personal opinion, it's a tragedy that the accounting rules allow public companies to do this, because I feel like the shipper community, especially in the Northwoods, lost a decade of potential operations because of this. But just kind of an interesting history that we were very familiar with this when it came out. As I mentioned, every deal was different, but there were some real eccentricities here, which we'll get into. The first and the biggest, and I think the most impactful, there will be many slides on this, is that Canadian National hired an investment bank, BMO, to sell Project Omaha. This was the first engagement that I had ever seen of a Class 1 hiring an investment bank to sell a spinoff of this size. Normally, investment banks get involved in the really big transactions, and because Class 1s like CN have robust departments, they usually handle it themselves. And so they work directly with folks like Watco and other short lines to sell properties. And this will create a level of complexity here that we've never seen. This deal comes with Canadian property. And not only that, but the CN basically was requiring that you incorporate as a provincially regulated railroad, not a nationally regulated line. And for many of you, which sure have interest, it came with the tourist passenger train, which my CEO asked me many times, what are you doing? But again, to be clear, we are fully supportive of it, and we completely understand the importance of it, especially for the community there. So we are going to operate the train. I'm going to nip that question right now. We're operating it for its fall schedule in 2022. The clusters did provide some complexity, like I was mentioning. You had to build a model for each one, and some of them, quite honestly, are almost impossible to stand on their own, given how light the traffic is, and just trying to balance how we were going to model all of that and operate. Let's not forget COVID, right? This was in the middle of COVID. There were no high rail trips like 2012. Very uniquely, though, CN did a really good job in their data room for all the bidders. They put a camera on a high rail truck, and you could, if you wanted to, high rail every inch of that line virtually. And a lot of the other material was provided virtually because of COVID. And the good news is we were pretty used to that by 2021 or late 2020, I guess. We had just closed our major Dow acquisition, which came out in the early onset of COVID in March of 2020. So we were used to doing these virtual data rooms, but still looking at this many miles on a video screen was interesting. But going back to kind of maybe some normalcy, it was a typical bank process. The bidders in the first round had virtually no interaction with CN. This was all being handled via Bank of Montreal, BMO. But what we quickly saw was the access to the customer carload data was top notch. Most of these short line deals from Class 1s, you get a volume. Maybe you get a spreadsheet with the different commodities, and you get a map, and then you have to bid. That's it. The model that came here, the financial model, the carload data, very impressive, very detailed, very easy to follow. We were very impressed by that, and it really gave us a good feeling about this deal, that there weren't going to be surprises, especially on the volumes and the traffic. The real nice eccentricity here is it wasn't just the blue lines, quote unquote, as we know them. It actually included other lines to be a little bit of a smart aleck that had traffic on them. They included branch lines in Appleton and Green Bay that had kind of, I'll be honest, growth potential and volume where you could actually bid a decent amount of money versus if you were just looking at what we had originally talked about. And then there's the one that is the Pandora's box of our whole experience, which is 2 of the branches actually connect with our existing Class 2 railroad, the Wisconsin and Southern. And so while we thought that was a major benefit, you'll see how that did throw some wrenches in as well. So you'll see on the right here, the landscape in shortline railroading has changed quite a bit since the pandemic. You've had logos here that you may not know. You have logos here that you do know very well, but almost all of them have changed. And so, for example, Genesee and Wyoming, who I know all of you should know very well, was a public company until right before the pandemic, when an infrastructure fund led by Canadian and foreign money bought and took private Genesee and Wyoming. And several other of these companies are using similar infrastructure owners to rapidly expand their business and to buy other short lines. And so it's created an intense bidding environment that we knew if we really wanted these lines, which we did, we had to have a very good strategy. So to get into the second round, we knew we had to aggressively bid up the purchase price on an EBITDA multiple basis, based on the fact that we had strong synergies with the WSOR, and this was in an area of the country that we knew very well, and we knew it's very conducive to carload traffic growth. So we were going to go strong at this. We were going to put a big number in and get into the second round, and hopefully show CN that if we're not the leader in the clubhouse, we're second. We wanted to show really well, and again, it was pretty easy to do that because of all the synergies we had with WSOR, utilizing existing team members, management, equipment, infrastructure, wherever possible. I think gave us a very good advantage in that perspective. We also knew a lot of the customers. PCA, the mill in Tomahawk, Wisconsin, PCA was Watco's first customer. Actually, it was a Boise Cascade mill, but PCA acquired Boise. So these are people we know extremely well. We have 20 plus year relationships with almost all of that team in Lake Forest. And then we have several WSOR customers that are up there, United Co-op and a lot of the plastics folks around Appleton. The other strategy here that really played into my mindset is, and you can still read it in Trains Magazine and other places, there are a lot of short lines that are selling these days, and they are selling at historic EBITDA multiples or valuations, to say it another way. And one of the problems that I have just intrinsically, and look, I don't have a problem buying other short lines, but short lines have already, there's no secret in short lines. We all kind of operate the same way. We're entrepreneurial. We do what the customer wants. We try and grow traffic. It's just, there's no secret sauce in short lining. When you buy one at a huge multiple, a lot of the low-hanging fruit, these short lines have already harvested. So I like these class 1 spinoffs, and everyone here knows why, right? It is the class 1s. That's where the low-hanging fruit is, but you can still partner with them and their massive efficiencies of moving traffic long distances to really get some good growth numbers. And we'll get to that in a second. But the fact that this was a spinoff and not paying a huge multiple for a short line that's already done a lot of the things that we would try and do was very appealing here. And the last point to me is the most important part, is we already had a roadmap with the CN doing 2, probably didn't even hit the radar transactions for most of you in 2020 on 2 small leased railroads with the CN that saw pretty dramatic traffic growth. And I'd like to share that with you right here. This is basically, I call it first mile, last mile, but it's really the terminal railroad concept. And what you're looking at here is Geismar, Louisiana, or part of Geismar, Louisiana. This railroad is what we call the Dutchtown Southern. This was a line that CN, I believe, had 4 or 5 locomotives, several crews, trying to switch all these different industrial customers, chemical customers mostly. And, these were crews and these were assets that were not on the main line. And anytime, you have a guaranteed train that needs to run and crews are short and COVID is happening, CN would run the mainline trains and not run these locals And so when you had customers wanting to expand here, you wanted customers complaining about demurrage, all these things, CN came to us and said, if we leased you the lead into all these customers and give you and give you access to the yard for purposes of interchange, would you be interested? And we said, absolutely. And so we started in late January of 2021. As you can see here on the side, we provide the service now. The class one gets amazing synergies. CN can reallocate all those assets, the people in the locomotives elsewhere, but still get all the benefit of the traffic, by the way. And the customers receive the consistent service with the flexibility of an affordable additional switch if they need it. So basically what happens now is most of these shippers get 5 or 7 day a week service or whenever they want it. We're out there every day. And if they want a second switch, most of the time we can do that too. So we benefit with the incremental growth beyond the base carload volumes. And of course, CN benefits because they get all of that growth. And the same thing is going to happen here on the Foxy. We already see it. And it's just a tremendous just confluence of what we do really well and what CN does really well. And so we applied this strategy to the Foxy and some of the numbers. Just so you know, at month end January 2022, the volume we did that year was 30% higher than the numbers CN gave us from their last full year of operation. It's a big win. This is the future. And this, you don't need a network. You just need customers that'll ship, and you just need consistent service. And it was just a tremendously strategic view in my mind for CN to see this, to be able to allow control to go away, if you will, to us. But let's face it, they still have the control. They have the commercial control, and they have the long haul. So it's really a nice solution. Okay, so let's go back to Foxy. So I mentioned it before, but as we were bidding, the geography, this is where you want a railroad. Just from our WSOR experience, all the different industries and diversity of industries that are in Wisconsin, and the ability to ship industrial product carloads versus intermodal is built perfectly for us. As I mentioned, this line had 90 customers, very diversified. We know a lot of them, and the ones, those are all in bold, were existing customers. And the ones that weren't, like Algoma Steel and 3M, massive, huge facilities. These are the things that get short lines drooling. And then there's Green Bay Packaging, which was in the process of a $500 million plant upgrade. I mean, this got us going. This was like, okay, there's some real opportunities up here. I mentioned earlier, no interchange commitments. And yeah, you know, a lot of sticklers trying to say, oh, Stefan's wrong, find something that you don't like. And a lot of the people that didn't like the transaction will point out, well, you don't interchange with anybody else. Yes, but it doesn't specifically have any paper barriers either. And that to me is a big give on CN's part and strategic to show that they want to grow traffic. And so you may be non-believers, but that is I thought a very key strategic step in how they looked at this. Simple service plan here. There's nothing as we looked at this on these lines that's any different from any place that we operate anywhere else. And as I mentioned, that growth number, railroads that we served with high volume customers that we started up leading up to this transaction, we're running at 25 to 30% run rates above what the class one did in the year before. There's big growth out there with our model, and we felt very, very excited about that. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention the great relationship that we have with WSDOT, with Michigan DOT, and the federal government to help us and our customers upgrade the lines and do things that we need to do going forward. So operational overview, again, like anything, we built this from the ground up using our pro forma modeling. We've done it a long time. I've been a part of that process now for almost 11 years. We start at the bottom, job by job, person by person, and you build up an expense, and then you kind of figure out, okay, what are you going to get paid, which BMO and CN provided. and it kind of spits out cash flow, and you figure out how much of that you want to throw a multiple on, and then pay somebody, which is what we did. Again, no unique characteristics here. We had a presence in Wisconsin, multiple shippers that we knew. The second to last bullet is something that I thought was very important too. Okay, most handling line deals these days basically restrict railroads, short lines, from putting in their own equipment. I basically have to give up my first and second child, which are my only kids, by the way, if I try and put equipment into one of my short lines with the other class ones. CN did not do that. They want us, when it makes sense, when they don't want to provide or can't provide the equipment, for us to do that. They're obviously not going to incur the cost of it. That's something we have to work out with the customers. But that really allowed us for the future to get creative on log cars and box cars, which actually Brian and I were working on this week, actually. So again, very strategic, very forward thinking there to allow us to do that versus kind of what I'll call the cookie cutter. Nope, just use CN system cars. That's it. And if you try to do it, we'll penalize you. That's what most of the other guys do, and CN did not do it. I give them credit. And again, part of our modeling is understanding we're not going to just bleed this thing out. We're going to have to pay CN money, and we're also going to have to spend a lot of money upgrading lines to 286, especially on the Wausau side. Repair bridges. There are a couple really big bridges in Green Bay and some bad bridges in Wausau that we have to fix pretty quickly. And then the big one is be prepared when and if the business case and the customers come is addressing the out of service lines and getting them back into service if the opportunities present themselves. Okay, so Project Omaha comes to a conclusion. November 2022. They tell us we made the second binding round. BMO does. They said strong bid. You're in the lead. Yours to lose. All that stuff that bankers tell you. And they said, okay, binding bids are due in January of 2021. Like, okay, at least we're not going to have to work through Christmas. Thank you, guys. That's nice. And to be honest, all the CN people wanted to not work either. So it was a good combination there. During this process, though, leading up to Christmas, we had several expert calls between our departments. This was when we finally got to engage with CN and ask questions. At this point, there were two really big surprises, actually, that came out of nowhere. And normally, when you have a bank-led deal, there are no surprises. The deal's the deal. But then all of a sudden, hey, CN's throwing in more track, and we're like, all right, awesome. And suddenly this northern cluster gets bigger. They throw in all the customers in Wausau, including the Abbey Spur, and then the customers down to Mosinee access via a joint track agreement with CN, because obviously the best place to interchange still is in Wausau. So that, they have joint tracks, so they can still run up an interchange in Wausau, but we can serve the customers down to a certain point in Mosinee. That brought the deal up to about 70,000 carloads, and that was very exciting. And we, again, getting customers like 3M, that was a big deal. This is not a Canadian discussion. That could probably be its own Zoom call at some point, but they also asked us to engage with a particular First Nation interested in the business and the passenger trains around the Sioux. So we began talking to First Nations and some of the Cree up there, which was a first for me and many of us at Watco. So in January 21, we submitted our final bid after obtaining, all our proper board approval and financing. Our banks and our board were incredibly supportive of this. This was basically, Stefan, win this or you're fired. I'm like, okay, got it. We're going in strong. This one matters. Just so you have an idea, we don't usually do that a lot. I mean, this one was a kind of a once every decade, let's make sure we get this transaction. And so in February of 21, BMO and CN informed us that we were the successful bidder. They were going to proceed towards a close and an announcement just with us. And so in March, again, a year ago, we began negotiating key documents so that we could announce the transaction and file with the STB. And those documents are really the asset purchase agreement and this handling carrier agreement, which outlines all the payments and what we can and cannot do. Pretty basic stuff. Whoops, I keep hitting the scroller key, sorry. But this is where the complications really started to hit us. And this is where having a bank kind of in the middle started creating some issues. And so my personal never again of Omaha. And I want to, before I get into this, I want to say something. BMO is our lead bank. They are a tremendously supportive organization of ours. They have incredible people there. Their investment bank has sold more short lines than anyone ever. They have a very successful model. But as I mentioned, and I think everybody that was involved, by the way, including the BMO bankers, us and CN would say investment banks should probably never get involved in class one spinoffs again. They just added a layer of complexity to this transaction that wasn't needed because we knew all the people at CN, several of which are on the Zoom here. I mean, I know them. I can pick up the phone to negotiate things. We didn't need this middleman. But because they were there and because they had to feel like they earned their fee, some real issues came up. And just to get into some of them, because I think you'll find this fascinating, in their initial model, and again, we do this a lot, so we can find at Watco kind of where the landmines are in deals. We saw that the model didn't have any car hire. And back when we couldn't talk to CN, we asked BMO over and over and over and over and over again, are we just getting cars for free then? No car hire exposure? Yes. Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Okay, that doesn't happen anymore. Are you sure? Yes, 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 yes. To the point where they wouldn't even let us ask CN on our expert call. And then guess what? When CN sent over the handling carrier agreement that talks about this, there were 0 free days, full car hire exposure, and that's a major problem. That's a multi-million-dollar valuation hit to us because you have to add that expense line back in after BMO, probably in a lost in translation moment, told us over and over again that the car hire was going to be free here and you shouldn't incorporate it in the model. Even though, again, every deal we do, you include car hire expense because guess what? Class ones don't give you equipment for free anymore. Probably haven't for the last 15 years, 20 years. BMO had another interesting component to their model, which they had a 3% perpetual rate increase in the model and sold it to all the bidders as contractual. Well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never seen a contractual rate increase in a short line deal like this. Usually it's tied to some sort of inflation or metric that you can track, but it can go down too. It's not just up all the time. And very similar to car hire, we asked BMO over and over again, this isn't right, correct? Like, no, it is. Until obviously when CN sent its handling carrier agreement, it had no intention of giving us that, and it didn't have any. It had the normal index. And again, though, the problem is we had bid based on that, and in that case, you would say, "Well, come on, Stefan, that's you being not very smart because you knew that wasn't going to happen." But the problem is if you don't give them credit for that in the book, you may lose to what I call the dumb bidder complex. So you actually have to, because somebody else may not know that. And so to stay in the game, remember I said we wanted to go strong in that first bid. We bid based on that, but now we find out it's not happening. And that's another multi-million-dollar hit to valuation. One other thing, and now we're going to start talking about the WSOR interface on these lines. BMO wanted a fast close. They wanted a fast close because they get paid faster, because they get a success fee for a successful transaction working for CN. And they did not like the fact that Watco brought additional closing complexity and a need to file what we call a major transaction at the STB due to the fact that WSOR is a class 2 and it directly connects with the southern cluster on these lines, which, by the way, have minimal traffic of that total 70,000. But another bidder could file under the standard 30-day exempted process and close. And so BMO actually wanted us to close into a trust very similar to another transaction, which will rear its head very quickly in this deck. The challenge, of course, is it's not an existing business. It's a carve out of a business. And if we had to do this, I was just joking with our team today when I was telling them we were going to do this. I was doing this presentation. I don't know if we could have actually pulled this off. And you'll see we got kind of a nice little break. Probably the only break we got in a second. I'll show you why, thankfully, we didn't have to do that. The other thing that BMO really missed the ball on, and this is one I'm still pretty upset about because it was an easy one to head off, is they were clearly getting murmurs that there were interested third parties and what I'm calling here concerned citizens about this transaction. And instead of alerting us to them, allowing us to maybe talk to them, beginning dialogue, BMO said, nope, I want my money. We're going to close into a trust so none of these parties have a voice, and go from there. And that backfired big time later, which you'll see in a second. We were going back and forth a lot. This was taking a long time. I told the story, actually, it will be a year ago tomorrow, where I had called our CEO and said, I'm ready to violate our non-disclosure agreement and call our contact at CN directly, because this deal is falling apart, because I can't negotiate through BMO anymore. They just they can't do it. They need to get out of here. And he goes, well, let's sleep on that for a day. That's a nuclear option. And I said, and I had always said from the beginning, I had very strong relationships with these CN folks. And I knew I had one bullet to actually shoot, but I was ready to shoot it. And right when I did, or was ready to, later that afternoon, I got a call from a Montreal area code. And I said, Horace? And Horace said, Stefan? And I said, I was waiting for this. And he goes, yeah, me too. And within 5 business days, CN and Watco, after 4 weeks of trying to work through BMO, reached an agreement on the transaction and announced the deal in early April of 2022. So it's amazing when you can actually get the folks in the room that know each other and the bankers out of the way in this case, how quickly things got done. Okay, so let's go to the STB filings. This is where it really gets interesting. If this doesn't have your attention before, this is all the stuff that you guys have read about, and this is where I started losing hair. So Watco announced the deal with CN, and we made a control filing with the STB for Fox Valley and Lake Superior Railroad and the Grand Elk to operate the U.S. lines under its major transaction process. The triggering event for the major transaction process, again, remember, because most of these deals are always a 30-day, almost automatic exempted process filing. What made it the major transaction were the 2 small little branches down south that connected directly with the WSOR. Again, if it was another bidder, they could have filed a 30-day exempted process proceeding, and most likely it would have gone through just like every other 30-day exempted process filing happens. A lot of people ask about the Grand Elk. Why is the Grand Elk here? Well, we had to use the Grand Elk because of how we are structured. Michigan has a very strange law that no one seems to be able to know why it's there, but they also don't seem to want to change it, that an LLC, a limited liability company, cannot own a railroad in the state. Watco is structured as an LLC, and all of its entities are LLCs. So because we had a railroad in Michigan already, the Grand Elk, we decided to use it versus trying to create another incorporated entity, and the tax folks get involved, and that's when my eyes glaze over. But everyone who's going, why is the Grand Elk in this? That is why. So for the lines in Michigan, an incorporation or an incorporated company has to own it versus an LLC. Okay, so again, to try to get to the quickest close possible, because remember, CN and BMO want to get paid. We all agreed to file the control filings with language that essentially was very clear to the STB that asking, can you rule under the 30-day exempted process given the minimal impact and interaction the WSOR has with the Southern Cluster, because that's the only reason this is a major transaction. And all the STB and legal experts agreed that the STB would quickly rule either in favor or against that treatment. And as I mentioned earlier, if the STB ruled in favor, we would proceed, we would get done quickly, everyone's happy. But if they denied that request, then we would pivot to this trust structure again, so that CN and BMO could get their money. And then we would go through the extended transaction process in a trust, much like what CP Casey is doing right now with the KCS. But what the STB did, and this is where at the time I was mad, but we caught a break, is it completely ignored this request and kept us in limbo under our original filing for 9 months. We basically went through the major transaction, but without having to go into a trust structure that had never been done or tested before. So even though I'm going to be critical of the STB right now, thank you, STB, for not actually ruling on that, because that helped us out. And again, the funny thing is we avoided all those complexities, but BMO didn't get paid, and they're the ones that started all of it. So again, it's just kind of funny how that this is more retrospective. I definitely didn't feel this way back then, but it was just interesting how it played out. Okay. So now, remember, in the middle of this whole process, CN put in a surprising hostile bid for KCS after KCS and CP announced their intentions to enter into a merger agreement. And because CN's deal was so financially superior, KCS actually chose the CN deal and rejected the CP deal and went with CN. So suddenly all the people that we're working with on our transaction, and we think this is the biggest transaction of the year, right? Now everyone at CN's like, whoa, who are you again? Stefan? Yeah, you're not Pat Ottensmeyer. And I'm like, yep. And so this team really got focused on the big prize, and I do not blame them, right? It's just a matter of timing. But the side effect was the CN, especially the government affairs and public affairs team, got very distracted and very wary of their messaging because they're the hostile guys now. They've got a long putt. They have to try their deal under the never tried before trust rules for them. And so what this created when we were moving forward is the public affairs team at CN would not allow any pre-announcement communication with key stakeholders, refused to allow us to communicate with customers. I mean, even post-transaction, they would only allow us to issue press releases. And it reminded me of the guy down there in Star Wars who's like, stay on target, as the guys are blowing him up from behind. And that's what happened. We got blown up because the result was everyone was caught by surprise. And everyone got behind the messaging and the merits. And as I mentioned earlier, this was the most emotionally charged short line transaction of all time, or at least in some time. And here come the folks that had concerns. Late Friday, a week after our filing, several identical letters of concern and opposition from multiple groups were filed at the STB. And they had very clear themes to what they were concerned about. And what really bothers me about this is almost all of these bullets we could have walked folks through ahead of time if the CN was more cognizant of the concern and not so focused on CN KCS. But you can just look at them here. Concern over lack of public transparency. That's a tough one. These deals are private. They shouldn't be done in the public realm. But confusion over GDLK, that's easily explained. concerned over Watco's amount of track miles in Wisconsin. Okay, I mean, it is what it is. Lack of interline pricing. Again, we explained all that earlier. Lack of interchanges. We explained all that earlier. No through Highway 8 corridor to the EL&S. We could have explained to folks what our plan was to get out of service lines back into service. But the main point of all these filings is this is not the WC. We want the WC back into Chicago because they were confused. We didn't get a chance to tell them what this actually was. So this general lack of information and confusion created massive amounts of filings against the transaction. And it comes down to, I understand it. Something was finally happening and no one knew what it meant. And so they filed at the STB, and CN Public Affairs blew it. They just blew it here. And I get why, but boy, it did not make our deal any easier. So now we pivot into the spring and the summer campaign, as I called it. We responded to as many of these filings as quickly as we could, reaching out to the filers directly, trying to get our message. I was directly defying direct CN orders from their public affairs person, Cudahy. I didn't care. As far as I was concerned, they messed up and we needed to save our transaction. So our government affairs team and myself and some of our commercial leaders immediately began accumulating shipper and stakeholder support, getting them to file letters with the STB. Many of our partners and friends, shippers, filed support letters right away. I particularly want to point out the Wisconsin Paper Council. I want to point out WSDOT just immediately sent in letters. And within weeks, we had 80% of the future lines traffic sending in support letters, which is just, that's a huge number.
Hey, Stefan?
Yeah, Brian.
If I can just interject here, one thing that too is, remember all the stakeholders that were objecting to us, none of them was a shipper.
Technically, I think one was up in Rhinelander. Right. Yeah,
that's
there
right.
was one. Yeah. There was one shipper representing a few hundred carloads. But yeah, so we got the shippers, as a great point, Brian. We got the shippers that actually ship to file letters, and then the remaining people that had filed, we met in Green Bay at the Titletown district. There, a nice picture at the bottom. If you haven't been there, go. It's a cool spot. I was stuck there for 2 days. But we met with the filing parties, and immediately at the end of those 2 days, the vast majority of those folks filed letters of support. And it just goes to show, if we had just gotten ahead of this, most of these filers wouldn't have filed. It was just not understanding the merits of the transaction. In the middle of this, though, as you can see with the train's headline, the STB announced it was delaying making a decision and didn't provide a timeline, which is just amazing to me. But again, now I was so mad at the time, but it was actually almost like a good thing, because if they had rejected our request for a short or an exempted proceeding, we would have had to have gone into trust. So they actually did us a favor there, but the reason they did it is because of all these filings. And so the poor people that all they wanted to get was a short line operator, in a way, you could argue, shot themselves in the foot by filing when they refiled 2 weeks later when they knew what the deal was. So by the end of the summer, regardless, all the parties had essentially supported the transaction that it had initially not. Other than the congressman in the Wausau area, Representative Tiffany, again, had a lot of history with the CN, and then one of the shippers that I've mentioned there, Northwoods and their partner. What was interesting about Northwoods and Branchline to me is, going forward, almost until the actual approval, they filed multiple opposition filings and asking for things like access to the UP and all these other things. We were unfit to operate. And look, folks can file whatever they want. It's free country, and I get that, and I respect that. The problem I had is the tact they were taking if the STB had ruled in favor of what they were asking for, you would have never seen a deal. You would have been stuck with CN because CN would not have sold the line under those conditions. Example, the CSX Messina line that the STB slapped a bunch of requirements on, which made both parties, CSX and the buyer CN, not want to transact the deal. And I just want people to know that maybe we're in support of the people filing these things. If the STB had listened, you would have been stuck with what you didn't want. And that was very nerve-wracking to us. But on the other hand, again, all you can do is keep messaging. We met with all of these folks. We tried to tell them that. But again, people can do what they want, and I respect that. Okay, so now we are waiting. It's like cue the Jeopardy music, Mike, instead of the Foxy, right? This is something I don't think anyone has seen in a long time. Because remember, when the STB rules, like in all these other big deals, Pan Am, CPKCS, CNKCS, they had timelines, right? They didn't give us a timeline here. So we're just waiting. The shippers continue to struggle. You know, the CN is selling this. They don't necessarily want to put a bunch of money into it, which I get. Everyone's in limbo. And then the shoe really drops on CN. STB denies their request for the new voting trust with KCS, which effectively kills that deal. The reaction is their CEO, JJ Rouet, announces his retirement. Who replaces him? Some of the names that I heard getting bantered around are some of the most short line hating people ever who have killed other deals I have worked on personally at other class ones. Winter is coming. You know, it is not a mild winter in Wisconsin. Starting up a railroad in the middle of winter is probably not a good idea. But I want to give the CN team a hell of a lot of credit here because their world got rocked. The deal they thought they had didn't happen, but they pivoted right back to our deal with full alignment and dedication to getting it done. And I don't know if other companies that I work with would have done that. I really want to give them a lot of credit here for that. After our filing in October, and I'm sorry, going over to the little trains thing on the right, with all this going on, we basically filed at the SCB, like knocking on the door, like, hello, McFly, you know, are you there? Or like, what's going on? They just ignored us again. They never said anything. But we mentioned weather, let's get going. We're ready to spend money. We have crews ready to go. But if there was a silver lining with no timeline, we got to meet all the customers. And so we were up there multiple times. Our WSOR team got to go up and see folks. We were able to hire Brian. And so we have never been this ready to meet customer needs because we had nothing else to do other than visit them and just go, well, we're still not here, but you know, when it does start, what can we do? And that includes a lot of growth projects, especially with 3M and Wausau. We were able to get ahead of the curve there to really kind of hit the ground running. And so again, a little bit of a silver lining. And then December 20th, 2021, my birthday, I may add, out of the blue, it almost seemed like a joke or something like a mirage because I couldn't believe I was actually reading it. The STB unanimously approved our deal as filed. They vigorously rejected the issues raised by the remaining adverse filings and supported our deal rationale completely. The irony of the wait is we waited 8 months for a 100% score. And I jokingly say, and I said this to one of the STB commissioners, I go, you know, waiting 8 months, I wish you'd have found something we didn't do right. But the fact is that they fully supported what we did. They completely rejected what everybody else that was still filing against us thought they could do or wanted. And that started the clock. We were ready to go and we immediately pivoted to closing, finishing up all the acquisition documents and transition documents with a target close date of February 1st. But what we always try and do, especially on large transactions, is start up on the weekend. You know, weekends are usually slower. So we knocked it up a few days to January 28th close with a startup on midnight the 29th. Some of the union notification requirements in Canada made us push back the Canadian side to February 1, but we suddenly had a timeline. And again, we were very appreciative of the STB. Obviously, we wish they had ruled a little quicker, but in the end, it all works out. So there is the beautiful Wisconsin chapter NRHS map on the right there, courtesy of Mr. Uhas and your group. As I mentioned earlier, every deal is different, but the lessons learned here. When you look back, or when I look back, again, the key is this has always been a game-changing and exciting transaction. And we did this, all of us, CN, Watco, the constituents, all the customers that filed, everybody that fought through this process. We got through a difficult and contentious STB filing, a confusing M&A process, our partner making the biggest hostile bid ever for another Class 1 and being rejected. And again, the 8-month delay for the regulatory approval. Again, I just have to point out here, hurting the people they're sworn to protect. And that's the thing that I just find troubling with that whole thing, is the customers just not getting the benefit of us sooner does have an impact. And that is something that I will continue to stress to these regulators when I talk to them. From my perspective, getting to startup, normal issues, but I will say this, in our experience, and we work with every Class 1, CN was the most supportive at startup that we had ever seen. I would just say, outside of the public affairs group and their kind of preconceived playbook, they were just tremendous to work with. Out of the 1,000 or so cars online, I think there were 4, or maybe it was even 3 in our download that weren't where CN said they were on the inventory load. And when I mean like not where they said they were like 1 track over. That never happens. We spend days unwinding that with other Class 1s. And so, look, just under 2 months in, and despite winter, operations are running smoothly. And like I said, the key is that the constituents up there, the shippers, the communities, have a tremendous short line partner with a tremendous Class 1 partner to grow that business again, much like what happened 20 years plus before with the Wisconsin Central. So with that, my piece is over, and I am going to, I'm going to mess up here and now do what I need to do. Stop sharing and turn it over to Brian.